Futures coming lower. Claims did not help much. Actually, claims did not have a lot of impact. Came in, continuing claiming. Initial came in lower than, or rather, better than expected, and that's what we want to see. Claims go up, and continuing claims also have to go up. That's the trend that we want to see, and we knew that from the JOLTS report that that's how it's going to be, and also from the ADP report yesterday, we knew that the payroll has decreased, so that means the claims need to increase. That's what we got today. Futures not very impressed. Did not have a whole lot of movement. It did move, but it did not have a whole lot of movement. So, could be technical reasons. Yeah, perhaps went up, came back down. So that's a 1 hour chart. If it comes back down, breaches below this baseline here, then looking at a push down into 4105 and then all the way perhaps into 41. So this is a key level on futures, and I'll be trading, based on futures, the first half an hour to 1 hour at least. So looking at 41 again, 41 should act as a pretty decent resistance. So far, about 20 points, less than 20 points move on in the overnight session. Fair enough, let it do its thing. So 41 again to the downside. That breaches will start to take in. Again, this is happening. Ay, ay, ay. Right. So it bounced here. Same thing yesterday, and I think the delta decreased from about 30 to now it's about 28, 27. So the delta will keep decreasing until the contract ends about 3 months from now. So the delta will become eventually become zero, right? So everybody who's been here knows that the delta keeps decreasing, and finally, the contract, the June contract will come equal to SPX cash or at expiration. So that's how the delta keeps decreasing. Right. Again, to the downside, this is what we're watching. That breaches will come back down into 4090, will come back down here into 4083. Even the 4 hour chart is getting oversold here. So we might expect a bounce probably here or here or here. As of now, not plotting anything sub 4080 for futures. So delta take about 27 points. That's about what? 4057 area, right? 4057 area. 57, 58 area. That's what we're looking at. And yesterday, I think I put out that thing in the note that 4050 to 4060 is a rather better bounce area. Yeah, so expecting this to happen. I need to fix this. Is going back to the chart that it is saving here. Anyway, so this is the idea. So yesterday the idea was the five, and it breached the five. And today the idea, if it doesn't bounce at the five, I don't think it's going to bounce at the five. However, just in case it bounces, we'll take a different approach. For now, the approach is it'll breach the five, then it'll hit the eight, just about 4095. It'll try to bounce again. That breaches, then we're expecting a push down into, where is that? This chart, a 4 hour chart, 50 moving average, about 4080 area. That's what we are looking at. And today, not really plotting anything sub 4080 for futures, but some reason that breaches and Apple starts to sell hard. Likely scenarios, this is what we're looking at 4026. So, again, this is a hard ask today. 4026 on ES is a hard ask, really a hard ask, I think. But unless Apple and Microsoft, starts to move down violently before the long weekend, people want to dump it. I don't know if that scenario plays out. Then likely scenario we'll see perhaps 80. I don't think 80 point, 90 point move is the date is calling. It's called for the day today. I don't think, but still, just for the sake of charting, we will chart it. If it breaches here, then likely scenario is 4026 area, the 200 moving average on the 4 hour chart. Again, likely not going to happen, but just in case Apple, Microsoft moves lower violently, then probably this is where it will end up. Definitely, definitely, definitely not the sub anything 46. It doesn't matter what happens, 4026 will not breach today. That's my understanding as of now. Right, so let's go on to this chart back again. The 8 will get tested. Very likely we'll see a bounce here. I think a pretty decent bounce. However, that breaches, it should come back down into that 4080 area. That 4080 breaches, then we are expecting a push down into 4068, 4065 area. I don't think it's going to breach here actually. Uh, but if it does breach, maybe the story for next week or something, and then we are expecting a move all the way down into mean reversion, right? This will get tested if the 50 on the day for ES breaches. Likely scenario, it will come back into the 200 into the mean. Probably we are looking at the next week, and if some negative headline crosses, then very likely we'll see the mean get tested pretty easily. 100 points to the downside, not an easy task given the conditions, but not impossible as well. We just need some negative headlines to get this smoother. Without the fear of bouncing. If you want to get it smoother, we just need some negative headlines. So what happens is by the time it comes down, actually, if it comes down here, you see this thing will be hitting the bottom. So again, it very likely will hit this number. And by the time it is hitting this number, this RSI will be hitting the bottom, and when it hits the bottom, it will bounce just like this. All of this stuff works in cycles. It was oversold here. Now it got broke the second, violated the second standard deviation, hitting a major resistance point, coming back down to 5. The ideal scenario is we are expecting it to come back down into 8. So that's how I think it should play out. And as and when it breaches the 8 in real time, likely scenario will again start to price in the 4065 number. To the upside, again, this should act as very decent resistance. So 4170 area on ES, so give or take about 150, 4153 area on 4153. Am I doing that right? Uh, 4143 area, I guess. So if the delta is 27 points, so 4143 area, I guess. So that should be the top for some reason, if it clears that 4120, 4130 area, then SPX might hit that 4143 area. Definitely not plotting anything above that. And bigger picture, again, this is screwing with me. And we don't have our Bloomberg News or whale alerts. I think something went wrong with Twitter itself, their feed. So we don't have that data. If, as and when we get that data, we'll start to see some more news items in real time. However, Costco reported decline in same store sales. That has happened, I think, first time in about 3 years. So that's a big negative there. Keep a watch on that. So downside, right about here, if it breaches that 4080, a 4080 area, then you're expecting 4077, then the 5 on the week, right? 4065. Likely scenario, this is a story for next week, but somehow it comes down. It's not much actually to get into that 4068. It's about a percentage point, give or take, from where we are right now. 1% move is common, right? 1 to 1.5%. I don't think today would call upside. Probably I'm looking at 0.5% to 0.7%. Downside 1 to 1.5%. 1.5% is a hard ask. Probably will get up to 1% downside. So if 1% downside happens, likely scenario is that 4070 number get tested. And if that breaches, this is a story for next week. The 8 on the day, then that breaches, likely scenario. This 4030 should hold pretty decent. I think this 4030 area, 4035, this will hold very decent for ES. However, for some reason that breaches, I think it should make a bounce around this 4015 to 4000 area. So give or take 100 points, probably a downside next week. Today, maybe 1% move, but next week, very likely we'll see this thing happen about 40, unless there is some, unless Fed makes some other headlines. I think next week we'll see this thing come down into this number. And FOMC, if the minutes reveal that they are looking at how the dot plot, how they are developing the dot plot go beyond that 5.5%, then very likely you will see it breach this number next week. 44,000 on ES. So that would be about 3970, 75-ish area on ES. Cool. Now let's get into Apple. We knew Apple story from the beginning, right here, violating the second standard deviation away from this 5. It had to come back into 5. It did come back into 5. And then the 8, right? So yesterday it bounced here, give or take, and I think I exited my trade somewhere about here, 164 area, and I was off and on here. And as soon as it broke below there, I was starting to expect a bounce here, right? Conditions are still there. I'm still waiting for this MACD to cross to the downside. I think it will push all the way down here into 159.80, and rather I would want to see a mean reversion. If the mean reversion happens today, likely scenario is that the SPX will likely happen to be, moving beyond 1%. Mean reversion for Apple is sitting give or take 157.80. So that's about a good 5 points from where we are right now, give or take. So if Apple gives up 5 points, likely scenario you will see SPX move lower. In fact, if you're watching Apple move lower, I would say go with the tech index, Nasdaq index, trade that index. I generally don't trade it, but now since I'm trading again back into futures, I might go short on NQ as well. So yeah, and I am still holding that Q's position, so I'll scale into that. If I see Apple moving lower violently, I think Apple will move lower into this number. Maybe just not today. Maybe just not today. We might see a test of this number, about 150, 159.90 to 160 area. So if it bounces here, fair enough. Well, that's how it should go. But MACD will cross over. If it starts to come down, MACD will cross over. Again, we know what happens when the MACD starts to cross over. This is what we got. Last time, half a cycle, expecting a full cycle this time. Full cycle meaning if it starts to come back down, I think this will breach. And The other thing that you want to be cautious about is the earnings, right? Earnings, I think, are on 27th or 23rd, not sure, for Apple. So be careful about that. I think Apple, if it comes back down, and it's an earnings play basically, right? After the mean reversion, it's very likely an earnings play after that. How will the earnings come out, and how will the outlook be? However, if it starts to move lower into the mean, maybe next week or something like that, then you will see MACD cross to the downside. This is very likely where the selling will come into picture, and oversold conditions are still prevailing. So we might see it come back down. If MACD starts to go down, full cycle sub the zero line, and very likely selling will intensify. Probably that's a story for next week again. So selling intensifies on Apple. Very likely it will bring down Microsoft with it, and Microsoft, Apple down. Everything else will follow. Cool thing. Let's go here. 90-minute chart. This is a new thing that I'm using now. Generally, I'm not really trading on this chart per se, but keeping an eye on this chart. But I will change these technicals on this chart. On this particular chart, I'll start to change these technicals and start to get some other technicals. I think our model of 1 hour chart. Come on. Right. So the model of 1 hour chart is working fine. I don't want to, I don't want to break anything that's working best. I would leave this chart and I would still trade based on this chart as is. But the 90-minute chart, very likely I'll make some changes. So here, yesterday we were expecting a bounce, and we got our bounce. Oversold conditions, got the bounce 5, 8, and the half trend hit. It came back down. The idea was for not to trade Apple here. If anybody traded Apple, that was good too. But the idea was still this bounce to be ephemeral bounce. I think I put out that note yesterday. This bounce was an ephemeral bounce. Clearly, we still are in a downturn. Likely scenario, this will get tested. And again, I think there will be a bounce at about 161. I think this will also be an ephemeral bounce. I think it is still heading lower. But we'll keep a watch on the technicals here. If again it gets oversold, and the bounce, if it happens here, very likely it'll stop here at the baseline on half turn. I don't think it's going to clear this. However, for some reason it goes and clears this 163 mark, then again you'll start to price in the half turn upper dots here, right? Upper limit. Mean reversion as of now, I don't think it's possible about 164. I don't think we are there yet. I don't think there's enough ammo here for it to revert to the mean on the hour. Mean right now is sitting at about 164. I really don't think there's enough ammo for that to happen. But if bounce comes in here, then likely scenario it'll hit the 5, and likely it's going to go up till the half trend baseline and start to come back down. So keep a watch on those. And again, these things works in cycles: oversold, overbought, oversold. That's pretty much it. So instead of, I again, many times I think I said this, I don't want to play the tops or the bottoms, right? I just want to play what is happening in between. So that's just how I do things. Yeah, so for our chart, this is the line I'll be keeping a close watch on. This is where I think there's a likely bounce. First bounce will come here again for Apple. That breaches, it's going to go down here and look for a bounce. If this breaches and starts to come down into this number, very likely today will be a 1.5% or better than that. But I don't think this is going to happen. Just in case it does happen, we'll keep a watch on that. Okay. Next, VIX. This is a chart that I've been watching since here, right? Since this thing crossed, this is the chart that I'm watching. Yesterday, we discussed a little bit about it. Yesterday, it hit the 8 and took a breather, right? Right about 20. It took a breather, and this thing is still crossed to the upside. SMI is still crossed to the upside. So, and yesterday I was saying that if it crosses the 8, then I'll start to take it seriously. Very likely it's going to move up all the way. It's going to hit this number, 2060 to 2070, between that. Likely scenario, it'll take a breather right about here at 2060 or right about here. Whoa, that's a decent change here. The 50 on the regular candles daily for VIX is sitting at about 2067, and on the high Kanashi it's sitting at about 2087. So technicals are what they are. So I'm expecting it to hit this number. If it clears, very likely it's going to go hit this number. But there is a breather between either this here or this here. And if VIX takes this path to the upside, very likely scenario, you will see some downward pressure on on major market moving stocks like Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft, and probably Tesla too. So if that happens, then very likely you will see that those stocks start to push down, and the broader effect on the market would be felt with the indices moving down as well. So yeah, that's why I'm keeping a close watch on this chart. And if you can see this thing here, right, it's been pinned under the 8, and it's been following that trend now since yesterday that broke. And you see these bars here, these are starting to go pale and smaller. So that's what is happening here. So if we clear that and the MACD starts across to the upside, then likely scenario will go here and again start to take a breather between either this line to this line. That's the idea here. However, I'll keep a close watch on this chart. If it is clearing here, that very likely it's going to go hit this number. Half trend upside, if that clears, we'll start to price in about 20. That clears, we'll start to price in about 2023. Right? So that's how I'm going to proceed with this. And as and when it starts to take a breather here, 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 very it will not go up in a straight line, but it'll hit this and start to take a breather. So yeah, if the breather becomes a reject, then likely scenario will see a bounce in the market. But if it starts to be a breather and start to push up, then likely scenario the market will continue to the downside. Okay, and Qs as well. Qs, okay. Let's get a little bit into Qs here. So when you say Qs, you're actually looking at the Nasdaq, not really the Qs. So here is the upside for the week chart at 12,440. So give or take about 250 points. And to the downside, we are still looking at 11,8. So that's about 100 points to the downside. I think this should happen first versus this number. So I think there is still a downside risk here at about 11.8 for Nasdaq. At breaches, it's going to come back down into 11.88 to 11.8. This is the downside. Are we going to get that today? I am not sure. I am not sure. But if Apple and Microsoft both starts to move lower, and Microsoft has a bigger say in Qs versus Apple. So yeah, watch that. And if Microsoft and Apple both start to come back down, you can expect it to hit this thing 1180, 1187 easily, right? So that's about give or take 100 points from where we are. If that breaches, likely scenario is going to come down into 11790 area. So there is a bounce between the 5 and the 8. Let's go here for Nasdaq. Right, so same scenario, right? Just like SPX, 5, 8, 8 breaches. Next up is this number, right about here. I think it should come back down into this number. However, by the time it starts to come back down into this number, it will be getting, it will be hitting the bottom here, right? The RSI will be starting to get oversold on the day. In likely scenario, probably, we're looking for a bounce here, probably either maybe Monday, Tuesday, sometime, right? So if it starts to hit the bottom, this will be a bounce, however ephemeral or not, but there will be a bounce, just like this one we had here, hit the bottom and start to bounce. Same thing will start to happen, especially in the towards the end of the hiking cycle. We'll see what the FOMC minutes reveal. But whatever, the idea here is still that the Fed is coming to an end of the hiking cycle, so that will help the growth stocks, the growth story. In this sense, the growth story is still intact with the tech. So tech, basically, if the hiking cycle is coming to an end, you'll see tech moving higher. Right. So this is gonna go down here. We'll start to look for a bounce. By the time I think it'll hit this number, either this will come down, or let's say if it starts to stall right here at the 8, then even then it'll come down, and then we'll start to look for a bounce again. This thing moved down pretty sharp, so likely scenario is that we will start to look for a bounce, especially if Apple starts to bounce from the 8, right? So that's how that's going to go. However, I think even whatever the bounce that will happen, that will still be an ephemeral bounce, and I'm still watching this here. If it crosses to the downside, especially on Apple and Microsoft, then very likely this will start to cross to the downside on Nasdaq as well, right? If this crosses, very likely you'll still start to see selling come in, and just like what we saw here, the same thing will gonna happen. And last time it came down and it couldn't breach the zero line, barely it did, and it started to go up. Now we want to see it breach that zero line, start to come back down, probably complete the cycle, and then start to move up. Probably we are looking at, again, this cycle to come down next quarter, or rather after earnings, and then after that summer's quarter, we'll start to push up again. That's how I'm thinking it's going to work out. Yeah, I think there is still some downside, especially if Apple's earnings or Apple's outlook is bleak. If that happens, likely scenario, we'll see a Nasdaq shed about give or take 500 to 600 points. Right, 11.3 is still the idea for Nasdaq. If Apple starts to give a negative to not rosy outlook, basically. Cool thing. Let's get a little bit into Microsoft. Uh, right here, this is what we are expecting. It to come back down into 277 to the downside. That's the downside. Then upside remains right here, 286 to 87. Downside is, so basically the idea is right about here. This red line is about 277. This red line is about 287. So the game will be played within these two lines, and as long as Microsoft remains within these two lines, I think you'll see the market hold up. And as and when Microsoft breaches either one of these thresholds, either to the upside or to the downside, I'm thinking downside. It should breach this to the downside. Then likely scenario, we're expecting Microsoft to 70 272 area that breaches. We want to see Microsoft come down all the way into 260. Now this move here, this is basically Chat GPT hype, and also combine that with the lower interest rates, right? In the 10-year was pushing 4.5. Now it's sitting at about 3.2. So that helped here. Right, and let's get here a little bit. Where is Microsoft? Right here. I think we'll be running short on time. So this is just how it works. This is classic. Violating this, it did not actually violate here. It violated, but it was still here. Leaving the 5, we got our doji, came back into 5, came back into 8, bounced at the 8. Again, the idea here is 282, that breaches, expecting it to come back into 278. Whether it's going to happen today or not, that's a separate story. But by the time it comes back down into this number, or maybe on the lower time frame, We'll start to see where's Microsoft? Yeah, yesterday it oversold again. These two charts, Apple and Microsoft, are pretty similar. It's gonna go hit this number 281.70 at the open. It'll try for a bounce. Very likely it will be an ephemeral bounce. After the bounce, and I think the bounce will last into this number 282.90. This line right here, I think this line should act as pretty decent resistance. And then if it breaches down into 281.60 area, I think likely it will breach that, and we'll look for another bounce just about here into 279.70 area. I think that should also be here, right about here. I think there is a bounce between where is that line? Between this line to this line, I think there is a bounce sitting there. Well, why am I saying that? Because we still have the RSI down here, and by the time it comes down into, let's say, 279, this will get oversold again. MFI, if MFI gets oversold, that will be another clear bounce there. That's what I'm watching. We still have time. Let's get into a bit of Tesla. I don't think Tesla is actually a trade today for me. But again, Tesla, if Apple and Microsoft both start to move lower, Tesla will breach this number and start to move into this number. 176, this should act as a magnet for Tesla. 200 moving average on the week. Very likely scenario, we'll see a bounce here. First bounce should come here at about 176 for Tesla. If that breaches, we are looking for a mean reversion. Maybe not a story for today, but definitely. But Tesla being Tesla, 10 points on Tesla is very easy. If it breaches that's 200 moving average, but I'm thinking there's a bounce here. However, after the bounce, let's say if it comes back down, starts to test this 200 moving average again on the week, likely it will breach and start to move into the mean on the week at about 170, 130 area. To the upside, 5 and the 8 here, 188, 60 area, that breaches about 190, 70 area. That should be the upside. I don't think it's going to make it all the way into 190s, but just for the sake of the bigger picture, we want to have that open. I think the actual trade, the upside should be just about here. The mean, 187.30 area, the daily mean should reject it. Again, if it moves higher, it should reject it. There is a lot of reject spots, 184.40, then right about here at 186 area, then right about here, 187.70 area. However, let's say if it comes up into and bounces up all the way here into 187.60, or rather the mean on the day, then I would likely think that there is decent enough resistance on that. Sorry, decent enough support on that. However, this thing is getting crossed to the downside. We want to see it crossed. And I think we did not talk about micro. This thing is similar to Apple. We want to see this cross. Once this starts to cross, I think the selling starts to begin here. And likely scenario, I'm expecting maybe not a story for today, but likely scenario next week, I'm expecting this to go into this mean and revert to the mean on the day. Likely scenario today, if the 8 breaches, then we're expecting it to move into 278. All right, 2 minutes to open. Oil, let's quickly do some oil here. Let's do oil. Oil, I think at this moment, I think oil should come back down a little bit. Test the technicals on the 5 daily, 79.20 area. That breaches about 77.80. I don't think the 8 will get tested today. Likely scenario 5 will get tested and the bounce. And the upper threshold remains right about here. So this is still the upper level that we're watching, 80 to 60 area. That clears, then we'll start to price in 84.70 area. Downside remains right about here at 78.25. I don't think it's going to breach below there. And I think oil inventories are still low, and production cuts are just amplifying that effect. So again, downside, we will see a bounce here, or for anytime it hits this, I think it will be a bounce. I think it will hold the 5 for the day. And if market starts to sell based on oil, then if oil starts to breach the 8, oh sorry, the 5, then I think the market, the selling will accelerate all the way down here into the 8. All right, 1 minute to open. Let's move into live trading.